Back in the early 70s, my mental picture of Texas, if I ever did picture it at all, was not a flattering one. I thought of Texas as a dusty desert populated sparsely by large men who wore big hats and spoke with strange accents, men who were fond of shooting at each other if they were not busy riding around on horses and chasing grey, long-horned cows across a monochrome landscape, a dry, colourless place, big and inhospitable. It was, therefore, not surprising that my initial instinctive and honest response to such a suggestion was, "Who the hell wants to live in Texas?" Judith was quoting from an advertisement in the British Medical Journal. Unusual bedtime reading material. I should have been more worried. "Rowing Town in Texas wants a family doctor," she repeated. "Sounds nice." I looked at her and wondered what it was that sounded nice about that sentence. How strangely devious is fate. It is not necessarily the strong winds of life that fill our figurative sails and push us to our destinations, but more often those small and sometimes unnoticed breezes that nudge and persuade. Texas had no appeal to me at all then. In fact, I was quite antagonistic toward the place. Not that I was completely averse to thoughts of moving elsewhere. The practice of medicine in England in the 70s had its drawbacks, and I never did like doing call. It meant being tied to the telephone and ready to dash out to house calls at all hours of the day and night. The phone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. "My wife has a fever," said the caller. I suggested she take some aspirin and call me again in the morning. "I don't know. I think you need to see her now." There was a fine mist, and the road was shiny with moisture. The streetlights reflected off the wet road. There was no other person around at this time of the morning. I drove back home through the dripping mist with that feeling one gets when forced to drive around in the middle of the night against one's will. A sensation of unfairness, of indignation, of a gently simmering rage. And into this fertile state of mind dropped a small seed, an image of a river in Texas. And on the water were boats, rowing boats. I pushed the image rapidly away. Who the hell wanted to live in Texas anyway? I spent what remained of the night wondering if they did house calls in Texas. On Saturday, we called the Texas number. The voice that answered, from those miles across the ocean, from deep in the heart of Texas, had an accent that was as English as any that came from Buckingham Palace. Texas seemed accessible, maybe even desirable. The owner of the voice was Dr. Nigel Worthington. And so began a series of events that lasted for almost a year. The conclusion was our arrival in Friendswood, Texas. It was several months after our move that I asked Nigel Worthington where people rowed in Friendswood. "Row?" he said. "Your advert in the journal said Rowing Town." "Oh, that? Damned silly, really. They missed the G out. Should have been Growing Town." Texas on a typo.